Well, hello again, friends. Welcome to Investment Immigration Conversations. I'm your host, Carolyn Lee, principal and founder of Carolyn Lee Pllc, a U.S. investment immigration law firm dedicated, I'm telling you, to the bone of helping clients build their futures with investment immigration. And whoa, I mean, look at these handsome faces. Am I the luckiest lady in all of EB-5 or what? The answer is yes, because today I am joined by these incredible gentlemen in this space and good friends. Ben Cummings of Birch Capital, and I'm going to let folks make your own introductions. Sebastian Stubbe from Pine State Regional Center, and Girish Patel from Green Card Fund. And these gentlemen represent rural projects and high unemployment area projects, sometimes both at the same time. And so we're going to have a friendly, good-natured throwdown where we kind of talk about the pros and cons of EB-5, rural versus high unemployment. We're going to bat around the questions that we get all the time with initial consultations from investor clients. The questions or the comments I'm going to kind of kick things off to these gentlemen are the comments and questions we get from clients and prospective clients. And so we're going to hear from the experts. And as a bit of disclaimer, so we at our firm, we only advise in U.S. investment immigration law. So we don't get anywhere near advising or discussing financial suitability, the nature of these investments in terms of their return prospects, any of that. We don't get into it. However, we will raise some of these questions because we get them and then we say, no, we can't get into it. But we know that these questions are asked of the project principals as they should be. So we're going to hear from them on those questions. What else? We're going to try to be entertaining. So usually we're very buttoned up and we say to folks, you know what, we're going to give you the best information we can. We're going to be as accurate and, all of that. And we will, but we're also going to spice it up a little bit. We're going to let our folks get juicy. So throw that in the mix as well. Get your salt shaker and throw it on generously throughout our talk today. All right, gentlemen, did I set it up okay?
Let's do it.
Awesome. So I'm just gonna go around the horn a little bit and let you guys introduce yourselves. Ben, you go first.
Well, thank you, Carolyn. And it's a pleasure to be on the webinar with all of you. Quick introduction. I'm Ben Cummings. I was one of the founders of company called Birch Capital that's been in the EB-5 space for about 15 years. Our background at Birch Capital, and we're a small firm, we're a boutique. We're all commercial real estate folks. So we entered the EB-5 market through a Miami immigration attorney who had a lot of clients interested in EB-5, but really didn't know where to place them and how to evaluate a good investment. And of course, EB-5 is an investment generally in commercial real estate. So just a quick statement on how we go about it is first, we just sort of evaluate any development project as a real estate investment itself. Is it likely to be a successful real estate project? And until we determine that, we're not about to try and make it a successful EB-5 development project because we like to sleep quietly and peacefully through the night. So our standard is pretty much, we don't want to sponsor a project for EB-5 unless we'd be interested in investing in it as individuals. So that's our bumper sticker statement, I guess.
Mm-hmm. You got to make sure you can put your grandma in there.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, Girish, you're up next, buddy.
All right. Well, thank you, Carolyn, for having all of us. I'm looking forward to spending some time here to throw down on a fun subject. So my name is Girish Patel. I'm the principal co-founder of a company, Green Card Fund. My background's in hospitality, primarily as a principal, from development to operations. So late 2008 was also started a advisory company for hotels. And, after the great financial crisis, found that there was, there was a need for capital. And, lo and behold, we stumbled into this thing called EB-5 and decided to explore it and see if this thing was really something you can do. And so we learned from our principal hat always is, you've got to own the problem. And so similar to, I think, Ben, is that our approach to EB-5 is, we can only take on a few projects at a time because I've got to own somebody's problem, right? We need to help own their immigration result. And so the way to do all of this is to work with the end in mind, which is, does the project, the investment itself make sense on its own merits? And then if it does, can we actually, structure in a way that can utilize this immigration benefit for such a worthy cause, and something that we believe in strongly. So we work with the end in mind. That is, the project has to be financeable on its own, and it has to be refinanceable on its own, meaning that there's a path to seeing it exit to the value that's been created in it. And in doing so, that should be able to meet a lot of the standards that these EB-5 investors would be looking for as well on their side. So so that's my background. Been doing EB-5 now for 15 years, on top of our daily hotel activity, but we also invest in quite a few other businesses, 80% predominantly in hospitality.
Nice. Thanks, Girish. And 2008 is really when I got going in EB-5 also. And I remember those dark days very well, from which we soared like phoenixes.
Phoenix, yeah.
Sebastian, please tell us about yourself.
So I am very happy to be here. I head up a regional center called Pine State, and we are part of a 70-year-old EDC, an Economic Development Corporation, which makes us a quasi nonprofit. We are focused on the southeast of the United States, so we are headquartered in Little Rock, Arkansas. But our purview is really all the southern, southeastern states, the so-called Southern Heartland, right? So we have been focused on revitalizing these areas for the last 70 years. We've done hundreds of projects over the last, in essence, 3/4 of a century. Obviously, not just EB-5, because EB-5 is not quite that old. So we do other similar programs, but really any program that has a job-creating aspect to it, we will employ as a financing tool. So we spend our time looking for worthy projects. They can be small, they can be very large. We have a particular focus on manufacturing in rural areas, so we'll talk a bunch about that today. As an EDC, we're heavily regulated, so the types of things that are now being asked of regional centers post the new law, the reauthorization law, are things that we've been having to do for many decades in terms of being audited by multiple state and federal agencies and using fund administrators and so forth. So we have a very, very conservative approach. But we're thrilled to be part of what has really become a manufacturing renaissance in the southeast of the United States, and love to talk about that. So.
And of course, a rural naissance.
Yeah, there you go.
So we'll totally get into that. So for folks' edification, Sebastian is here for rural, in the rural corner. Girish is also in the rural corner, but he can pinch hit for high unemployment, and high unemployment is going to be represented by Ben Cummings. And because we've just got one on the high unemployment side, we might have Girish kind of, getting in there for high unemployment area. Yeah, exactly, because you can kind of do both. So let's see how this plays out. I'm kind of stoked, guys. All right, so first question or comment. Under a Trump administration, it's obvious that rural is the way to go, right? Ben, I mean, why should I go in your high unemployment area project, even though you'd put your grandmother in it?
Well, I don't know that we know what way to go we're going to go in the next 4 years, first of all. But politics aside, there rural projects can be good. High unemployment urban projects can be good, or they both can be mediocre, or they can both be bad. And so it really, in our thinking, it really depends upon your goals as an investor, what you're comfortable with, what you understand perhaps about the kind of investment you're making. And that's sort of where our team goes back to our commercial real estate roots. And we think that really all EB-5 projects have the same goals for investor. Number one is get your visa. Number two is get your money back when it's due, and hopefully get it all back. And number three is get a somewhat below market rate of return in the meantime. And so evaluating a rural project or an urban high unemployment project depends on whether you think you're going to meet all those goals. We've stuck in urban because the projects are large, the developers we've worked with are people we know and have had, in some cases, 10 or 20 years experience working with them in the non-EB-5 world. And so for us, it's easier to evaluate the pros and cons of the commercial investment risk.
All right.
Immigration risk, that's your ballpark.
Okay. So then I'm going to toss it over to you guys, Girish and Sebastian. So, I mean, do we think that immigration is going to be packed with officials who are going to be more in line with, let's say, the new Republican tilting agenda? And do we think that that's more closely aligned with the rural projects? And
Girish, I'll jump first if you don't mind. I mean, as Ben said, I think it's very early days. I think as an EB-5 investor looking today, you're probably thinking more about the potential downsides of processing times getting clogged up, about consular processing getting clogged up. Those are things that we saw the last time this administration was in power. In terms of the type of projects, I think we all have heard plenty about the coming tariffs. There's going to be a big tariff war. And so there will be some industries that get hit by that more than others, right? And then, obviously our, coming president has a history of real estate, right? He also has a lot of colleagues and even family members who have participated in the EB-5 space. And so I don't see EB-5 as such, under threat. I think, the general view, while there will be a lot of discussion about immigration and probably some increasingly anti-immigration pressures, if you will, I suspect that EB-5 is not at the top of that list. And so, again, I think that the political winds are more likely to affect the immigration side of things as opposed to the investment side of things. And, I'll get a lot deeper into this in a minute, but I do generally agree with Ben, which is there are good projects in both and there are crappy projects in both, so this is a case by case game. You can't really, paint the whole thing with the same brush.
All right. So Sebastian, so rural and high unemployment so far kind of singing from the same hymnal here. So Girish, what are they missing? Obviously, I'm
going to wear both my hats.
Okay.
Right? Commonplace. Well, you led with a big punch, right? You started here with what's the new Trump administration, going to do? What does this help rural? That's how I want to interpret that question, because there's a reason why most of the projects in the 15 years I've been looking at EB-5 have been high unemployment TEAs. A vast majority are not rural, even by old standards. They wouldn't have categorized as rural. It's because most of the businesses, the transactional businesses are around these more dense population areas that aren't designated in those areas, right? So what happens with a Trump administration from a commercial standpoint is, yes, he's pro-business. He is, as Sebastian, correctly stated, we're expecting a lot more onshoring, right? And so that's going to mean that there's going to be new infrastructure that's going to need to be built. There's going to be new industrial that's going to have to be built. That's great for rural. Now, what does it mean for today? Somebody that's looking at an investment decision today, that's tough. And I think that gets a bit into Ben and maybe both of your points. When all these things come about is a big unknown. What will happen through the winds of immigration and and how the administration will change is a bit unknown. But it starts with there's going to be good projects in high employment TEA, and there've been crappy ones, and you're going to see the same thing happen in rural. I think what I fear is there's a flock because of the immigration incentive into rural. It becomes really popular, and that EB-5 as anything else creates a windstorm of buzzwords, and people will just jump into rural because it says rural. That's because there's so many complexities to EB-5. They'll say, yeah, I hear rural, let's go. Well, does that rural project make sense, right? There are all these, okay, there could be this new industrial plant that's going to be built. It's, I'm hearing about this right now with Intel, right? And you see it with Intel, and that the Intel, the grant money that was being provided for the new plant may not be the same model this time around after the administration. It may put some of those elements at risk, but because it was so many years out. So I think the tide is definitely going positively for rural in itself. It's going to make more rural projects viable than it did before. High employment TA is still in a positive business place, and in early stage, economic and policy changes, you typically see the early winners being in those kind of categories. But there's going to be winners on both. There's going to be losers on both. Right?
Well, you guys have been disappointingly even-handed and prudent and way too smart. All right, so I've got my work cut out for me. All right, so this is a very common question, guys, or like a position or assumption. Rural projects, just from a financial standpoint, they stink, right? Just they're riskier from a pure investment perspective. And so, an investor, I don't like that. Is that true? Generally speaking?
Look, I think that what happens is that people extrapolate from the past, and they draw conclusions based on what were traditionally the typical, project types that people saw, i.e., office, condos, hotels. And clearly there's plenty of rural areas where that may not make a lot of sense, right? But there are lots of industry in categories and subcategories that make more sense in rural. Sometimes you hear detractors say that rural projects will generate less economic activity because of lower populations, but
right.
If the project's end product is not serving the local population, then that has no bearing, right? It might be a storage or a distribution center. It might be a manufacturing facility that does not sell locally. It's just making stuff locally. So the local population and the amount of foot traffic has absolutely no bearing on the success, right? So, and there are obviously industry types that would be extremely successful in rural and wouldn't be successful in urban, simply because they need, the cost of land is so much higher.
Is there like inherent risk because of exactly what you said? So manufacturing, I don't know anything about finances or anything, right? But so
Right.
Manufacturing, you're producing stuff, but then you're like dependent on there being a demand for that stuff. Whereas
but let's say it's a Mercedes,
go wrong,
right? Or it's a Tesla, or Honeywell, or General Electric is making wind turbines. They need 2,000 acres of land to build a new plant. That's not going to be inside a metropolitan statistical area. That's going to be somewhere in a rural area. And keep in mind that rural itself, the definition, I think most people picture a prairie, or a savanna somewhere. Rural can be quite populated. It just can't be inside a metropolitan statistical area with 20,000 people or more. But again, you need enormous amounts of land. You need cheap energy. You need good transportation networks. So they tend to build a large battery facility or semiconductor facility or the new Ford plant or General Motors plant. They're going to build that in a rural area, right? The fact that there are or aren't that many people there, that may impact the project in terms of the ability to find good and a good labor force. That becomes a possible thought that could sway you. But it's not, the location isn't going to have the economic viability impact that most people, the detractors typically say. Think about all the Fortune 500 companies that ply all or the majority of their trade in rural areas. I mean, there are enormous companies that are set up because they need space, right? Now, historically, again, that's not been something that we've seen a lot of in EB-5. I mean, we have seen predominantly hospitality, condos, and office, right? But I think you're going to start seeing, in our particular case, and we can talk a bit about some of our more recent projects, but all of our stuff has been large scale, high grade, state-of-the-art manufacturing. We've done a lot in the steel industry and the recycling industry. These are enormous projects that clearly need to be situated in an area with a lot of space. But we were really the first ones to do that in EB-5. I think you're now going to start seeing more of that. And I think to Girish's point, simply because people from a marketing perspective want to attract investors, they're going to slap the word rural on something. That doesn't mean it's going to be a good project, right? You do need someone to be doing something that makes sense. And where there is experience there, and where it's not just hey, I'm going to take exactly what I usually do and move it over here and see if it works. I do think these categories have to make sense, but we're starting to see, as you know, Carolyn, a much broader geographic footprint for EB-5 than was previously the case. 5-6 years ago, 90% of the capital was flowing to 4 or 5 states. And now it's flowing to 24 or 25 states, right? Which, by the way, is increasingly popular on Capitol Hill, which I think we can get into that too. But I think that augurs well for the next reauthorization, which we need very soon.
Well, you make a good point there, Sebastian. But Ben, it's just a lot of hot air, right? Clearly high unemployment area, real estate, urban projects, superior products from an investment standpoint, generally speaking. Is that not true?
I feel like you missed an opportunity, Carolyn, that you didn't go into like late night television or something like that, or maybe even World Wrestling or something. I feel like you've got a knack for this.
It's coming out, Sebastian.
Yeah. You may have chosen the wrong path.
Let me throw one thing back at the immigration side of this. Our thinking about rural is what we call Grassley's revenge for the pre-RIA investments. And from the congressional standpoint and the immigration standpoint, it's one thing really hard about this business is it's hard to define what's rural. I don't think of building a resort 2 miles outside of Aspen, Colorado is necessarily rural. It may not be a lot of people there, but you can build a Ritz-Carlton there just as well as you can in Manhattan or in Newport Beach. And it'll be successful, no doubt.
Well, and I think what you're saying, Ben, is that rural doesn't necessarily mean disenfranchised or distressed. Right. Correct. Rural can be perfectly wealthy and do we really need that capital there or not?
Right. Absolutely. And then the next category that the RIA put in place, this new infrastructure category, it's sort of the same thing. It's been 2 years now. I don't know what infrastructure means in terms of EB-5 because there's no guidelines. Personally, we don't know of an infrastructure project that's going to use up the 2% of the visas because nobody knows how to define it. So Congress needs, a lot of work needs to be done to sort of make the rules. It's EB-5 is unlike the securities side of the law where you got 10,000 books worth of rules, regulations, and guidelines. You can pick it up and know what they are. And I don't think we know all of that yet. So it's easier to assess the investment side than it is the immigration side.
All right, well,
Up to you.
then I think you squandered the opportunity to squish Sebastian. All right,
I'll
Girish,
do it. I'll do it.
All right.
I'll use the
Okay.
opportunity.
bring it.
We'll put our WWE belt on and we'll throw down a little bit, okay?
That's right.
Look, I feel like I'm picking out of my two children, which one's my favorite, because I have projects on both sides. But I can tell you what I see. I operate in 4 different states from an EB-5 standpoint. I have this kind of rule of thumb in when I underwrite with EB-5. Our normal investments, about a third of everything that comes through is probably worthy in a normal investment. In EB-5 land, it might be 10%. Okay. So if I've got to look at 100 deals that come through our office, and out of those, maybe 10 are worthy of EB-5. Right? Now I take, that and then you skinny it down even more because you have to, a project can be really good and it's got to make sense for EB-5 and the developer's got to be really excellent. And the sponsor's got to be there. Timing's got to work out, to make that work is tough, right? Well, through the years, I would tell you, well, right now I'm looking at about 20 projects, 18 of those that have kind of met through the first filter process have gotten me to 18 high unemployment areas of that 20, and the 2 are rural. Okay. So the argument here would be in all equal cases, I'm going to have 20 really good deals. I'm going to be able to pick 1. I should, or that's at least from our philosophy, I would pick maybe 2. But if at a rural, if I wanted to pick 1, I only have 2 to pick from that I think are good enough for an EB-5 deal.
But in fairness, and to throw back down at you, Girish, you're talking real estate, right? You're talking mainly real estate and hospitality, right? So if I gave you 20 manufacturing projects, I'm guessing you're going to find that 18 or 19 are going to be rural and 1 might be urban, right? That are going to make sense. And so again, it comes down to the category, what does or does not make sense in a certain area.
And can we?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. That's what I said is when you look at these projects, you've got to break them down to a project specific nature, right? And that there are, a lot of industrial based projects you'll see are not going to be in extremely high density area, right? So if someone specializes in that, you may find that more of their assets are going to be in those types of markets, right? So the other argument that I typically have in terms of like how I evaluate a project is, again, I said exit in mind. So how am I going to liquidate this EB-5 money out of a project? I've got to find a refinance or a sales source, right? So I'll use hospitality because that's our specialty. There's 15 or 20 different financing programs, let alone lenders, conventional, unconventional lenders that will go in and say, okay, these are the reasons I'm willing to make this loan. A lot of the assets that we see in terms of rural, right? And this might even spread beyond hospitality. There's not that many programs that might exist. Now we know USDA as a U.S. government program is very active and that can be utilized, especially for new construction. But you are looking to say, what are the vehicles that helps effectuate the sale? Like if we use Tesla because they're a big popular name right now. So you use Tesla. Tesla's going to build a plant and they're not going to sell their plant. Right. They're going to use,
and I completely agree. I mean, and that's where I think an operating business, as opposed to something that needs to ultimately be sold or refinanced, where the operating cash flow is not enough to pay people back. An operating business is going to be a better choice, right? Because someone is a business, use Tesla as an example, that is gonna just be churning out cash, whether or not they sell it to another operator or they keep it themselves. Ultimately, it's a cash cow, and you don't actually have to think about refinancing. And is there refinancing available for that region, or is there a government program that you can lean on and so forth, right?
Right. And I think you've hit it on the head, right? This is that what you're doing is, and we call it underwriting. When we're looking at these projects, you're underwriting a cash flow, right? And it's, so you're assessing that business differently. And this goes back to Ben's original point, deal by deal, right? It's really project specific,
Absolutely.
business specific. You know, and I would tell you, I mean, I get projects coming to my table that are across every industry line, right? And they all look a little bit different, but you can see these common threads, that there are tools and solutions for projects and real estate and whatnot specific to those assets. And how do you EB-5 that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think the circle really comes to. I mean, we've got I'll argue the other side. I've got a rural project, and I can tell you that the business really underwrites extremely well because it's an extremely high demand area. You find a lot of these rural markets are, to be a little bit further out from the major density places. But as Sebastian mentioned, they're looking for maybe larger land. They're looking for some infrastructure. When you look at some of your smaller projects, they're within an hour or two of the big MSA, their destination potentially. There's something has to do with the nature and the natural resources associated, and there's infrastructure, and those just become really high demand. And people are going there, and the economic development, the economic impact is so high that for the projects that are really good in those rural markets, those projects, they underwrite really, really well. They're really, really valuable. So that's the argument on both sides for my take.
All right, guys, you're doing a good job here, because Sebastian's got a little furrow thing happening right here, which means that the throwdown is on. So well done. All right. But guys, with concurrent adjustment of status, I mean, I can go into a high unemployment just as easily as rural. I'm going to be fine from an immigration standpoint, right? Like it's the same, right? Rural, high unemployment.
Assuming you're in the United States.
Assuming I'm in the United States and adjustable, thank you. Right? So
yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, and again, I'll join the other side for this. There are investors that will come to us and say, oh, I really want rural. And then we'll talk to them, and it becomes clear that, they don't necessarily need rural, right? Because they're already here, they're an H-1B and so forth and so on. You might still have the question of how long will it take for me to get my money back, right? But in terms of the actual immigration process, you don't really need it, right? You're going to get your EAD either way. And so why do you care about how long the line is? So yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think that there are aspects where it's not necessary. And also we will likely see retrogression in that new HOV lane on the highway at some point in the not distant future. I mean, I think at this point, we're not quite seeing it yet. From what I understood, the most recent IIUSA numbers that came out, I was actually on a panel with Charlie Oppenheim not so long ago, which meant I really didn't have much to say sitting next to him, because when you sit next to the Oracle, you're just kind of wallpaper. But we were kind of parsing the numbers, and even though China, for example, is obviously accelerating massively, we're still talking about so far only about 6,500 applications since the RA, and so we're probably a year and a half, 2 years away from a real problem there for the Chinese. But again, it's going to come. So at some point, that part of it's no longer, is going to move the needle. The priority processing still might, right? And we're seeing very attractive priority processing, or processing that we believe must be priority, right? If for a long time, none of us knew what it meant. But now we're really seeing, we've had about 160 approvals since the RA. Actually, no, 160 approvals in the last 12 months. We've had about 250 since the RA. But of that, it includes some pre-RA and about 110 post-RA. But our post-RA people are averaging about 6.5 months.
Well,
so that's
down right there. I mean.
And that's
sure.
pretty fast. But I will be honest too, and Carolyn, you'll probably corroborate this. We are seeing a slowdown, a non-Trump slowdown, by the way, already. I would say the last 2-3 months, we have definitely seen a more of a slower trickle thing going on. They're not quite as fast right now. Perhaps it's just they have more to do and more people have applied. And so now they're starting to get a bit backed up. I don't know. Maybe others are Girish. I don't know what you guys are seeing, but that average that was very attractive is probably slightly, less attractive, but it's still very attractive. And so as such, that matters to some.
And Ben, that's, you gotta, what's your response to that? Prioritize processing.
Well, it's not fair, for a start. It might be retribution, I don't know, but it's not fair. So, yeah, I mean, I can understand why you wanted to have some way to juice up the rural markets that got overlooked in the last 13 of the 15 years. But if they're going forward, I mean, I don't know why there shouldn't be a level playing field if you can priority process some people and they're paying for it. You ought to be able to priority process everybody if they're willing to pay for it. So, I think that maybe the pendulum will swing back, maybe not. What remains to be seen is, will there be some rural disaster? And I hope that's not the case.
There's like, he's sort of,
I don't know, who knows?
I think that's exactly some wishful thinking there on Ben's part. I mean, but Ben, but surely you have something. I mean, an investor says, you know what, Ben, I like you. You're very handsome, and you buy me nice cocktails, but rural, faster processing, man. Prioritize. I mean, what you got? I mean, what are you offering?
Well, we're offering a large urban project with very strong financials, an operating business. It's an unlikely, and I'm not trying to pitch our existing deal, but it's an unlikely EB-5 project. It might be the most unlikely in the United States. It took a lot of vision on people smarter than we to realize that there was a place for EB-5 in it. In a very dense urban area, it's an industrial project. It has huge security and strong tenants that are providing profits and 50 to 70 jobs per investor. So what's wrong with that? You're going to get your visa, you're going to get your money back, and you're going to get a little bit of interest in the meantime. Those are the goals. That's what we're selling.
All right. Girish, do you find that compelling?
I live in the space, so I can see what's compelling, but it's hard as an investor to see it, right?
Yeah.
But I totally agree with Ben. I mean, it's like, is it fair? No, it's not fair to a deal in an incentive that, especially when it's unknown. There's a lack of clarity of really what priority processing means. Now, it means one thing today, it might be attributed differently tomorrow. I think for Sebastian's point, and I know we're in the pro. Let's go in the pro rural hat. Pro rural hat says, look, it's going to get priority over anybody else, and there's a wave of people. So you're going to get some speed, and we've started to see. We've been seeing some record history within this past year, especially compared to old EB-5. This is, we feel really good about what we have right now, right? We're already starting to see a bit of a slowdown, similar to what you just said, Sebastian. And so when people ask me what to expect, I can just tell them on the rural project, I expect you to probably be ahead of the line if there is such a thing. That's unclear to us. Here's the big unknown. You led with it, Carolyn. We have a new administration from which we have no idea how two departments, this isn't just one department of the US government involved in EB-5, right? You've got the USCIS that are doing their thing. You've got the Department of State that need to do their part, right? And so you might have gotten, I don't know, if you may have gotten approved earlier, nuances of the technicals EB-5 really will take over. But in the meantime, it's a great marketing label to keep moving with for as long as you know it. It doesn't change that. Did you get the right predictability in your project, right? And I think that's still always going to be the underlying fact. I mean, example, hey, there's a rural project and it believes it has, this priority processing. And I'm not speaking to Sebastian, I'm speaking to it as a general statement that anybody that wants to put a rural deal out there. Well, okay, now you've got this, maybe this high unemployment TEA project that says, hey, this is 80% complete. It's a known repayment here in 4 years. You've got this phenomenal sponsor, right? And especially if you're in concurrent, like you led the question with, right?
Right.
What are you worried about? And I think that's what our industry needs to do really well in educating. I mean, Sebastian said it. How many people have called, contacted your office and you said, it doesn't matter for you. You're not even from a country.
And by the way, for the greater good of the industry, it's actually not great if some people that don't need it chew up the set asides. They may as well not go into the set asides and go elsewhere, because if they're not disadvantaged in other categories, then it's better for all of us to encourage that, and we proactively do, right? Because we want this to be a
Canadian or Austrian, go to Ben's project, right?
Exactly. But I mean, the reality is, look, Ben, I agree theoretically that this is unfair. You do have to keep in mind, I think, and I don't want to put words into what Senator Grassley was feeling at that time. But I think the general consensus was, if we don't give it some sort of a temporary, at least, leg up, no one's ever going to look at a rural project, right? I think we are now going through a period which may ultimately serve all of us, and Ben, it may come back to where you would like it to be, which is that the investor community in general has had to look elsewhere, right? They've, for the first time, had to learn how to pronounce state names like Arkansas and figure out where that is on a map, and so forth. And as people get comfortable, and as there are more success stories, and as I said earlier, you're now really getting meaningful EB-5 in like 25 states. And by the way, not just rural. We're also talking about urban, but not the usual 6 or 7 cities, right? And all of that, I think, will lead to an industry that is more diverse, but also to congressional buy-in, right? There previously, and Girish, as Girish knows, his partner and I have been on Capitol Hill as part of these education meetings, if you will, where we're meeting with a dozen senators and congressmen every quarter, and kind of just to explain what's going on, to demonstrate some of the impact that's happening in the industry. And it's awesome to see, because 5-6 years ago, we would walk into these offices and 9 times out of 10, they would say, why do I care? This is never going to benefit my state. It's never going to benefit my district. I'm not really interested in supporting this, because it's just going to Manhattan and Beverly Hills. Now we can go in with really great stories, right? And not to kind of trumpet our own projects too much, but I'll give you one little anecdote. I'll give you a little anecdote about one of our recent projects. So in about 6 years ago, we financed a state-of-the-art steel plant. It's actually a recycling facility, and it's today not only the most profitable steel plant in America, but also the only LEED certified sustainable steel plant. And then we have we're now about to launch our 8th offering for a number of these similar plants. But if you just take the first one, before this was built in a census tract where the median income was $23,000. Okay. 2 years ago, which is the last time I checked, or the last data we have, and it's presumably gotten even better. But 2 years ago, the lowest paid person at Big River Steel got paid $105,000, and then the average at the plant was actually closer to $135,000. So we're talking like 6x the median income of a very large census tract, Mississippi County, this entire area. The ripple effect, and of course, if you're building a, $2 billion steel plant, you can imagine that other things crop up around it, ecosystem wise, off takers, suppliers, more people at the rail yard, et cetera, et cetera. So that ripple effect is very, very meaningful. When we go and meet with people in Congress, obviously, if we're meeting with someone who is not from Arkansas, they're going to say, well, that's not helping me yet. But they love hearing a story like that because they'll say, well, actually, my state is about the same size as Arkansas, and I can imagine this happening here. Maybe it won't be steel, but it'll be something else. Tell me more. Tell me about that impact. And hey, actually, you know what? You got my vote for the next reauthorization. So I do think this is important for all of us. And as I said at the beginning, this ain't just the rural, right? You can make a similar story about an urban distressed area outside of Detroit, Denver, whatever, that weren't previously seeing a lot of EB-5. So I'm actually very bullish on the program, also because, as both Ben and Girish were talking about, less blowups is a good thing, right? I think the RIA has served to weed out some of the less professional actors who perhaps neither had the wherewithal or the willingness to put in place the compliance infrastructure that they really should have. And I think we're a safer industry as a whole. So I think there's enough to go around. I know you want to throw down, Carolyn, but I like my fellow panelists, and I think there's great programs. Great projects across the program.
Done amazingly well. A+ all around. I know it's hard for you guys to be a little mean, and you did great. I'm proud of you. All right, so that was lovely, and frankly compelling. I think that's a great point. Ben and Girish, I'd love you to kind of close it up, and then we have a great question on the floor that I would like to end with. So Girish, you go first.
Oh, okay. So it's not as much, I think, anecdotal. I think what you have is, I break this thing down into the next 6 months and then the 6 months thereafter, right? I think there's, regardless of your role, the next 6 months is still a window of opportunity, right? Nothing is retrogressed. What will happen is far down the road, and whatever changes happen in DC will be kind of secondary. So right now you have some predictability within, I think, what the next 6 to 9 months looks like. Pick a great deal, right? That there's always that particular piece. Beyond that, I think to Sebastian's point, I think the industry is going to be setting itself up really well for 2027. I think within the administration, who is a big fan of EB-5, by the way, right? You've got an administration that is known as positive on merit-based. They're going to be strict on how it's earned, which to me is kind of like, people, the highway construction happening, and there's a little bit of congestion that builds up, but everyone's moving down one lane. Well, that lane to me, to us, is EB-5 centric. So I think we're set up really well for that, and I think that will continue to create different incentives for where opportunities need to exist throughout the country, and what's happening in these international markets. I think from a lot of the engagements that are occurring, DC understands. They understand where the big markets are that are active in EB-5, and what they need to do to keep processing those. So at best that we have, project specific, make sure you've got the right window, the right underwriting that's occurring. If it's visiting a project or whatnot, you just got to do a lot more due diligence than used to be, especially when you're looking at a label that's a new label only, that has little impact on the viability of the project or not, right? So that's kind of my last 2 cents. Sebastian, Ben, I definitely don't want to punch on you guys too much, because I know having both project types works for me and against me at the same time. But that's my 2 cents.
You did
Yeah,
great.
I can't complain. It's all, all of us have successful EB-5 projects. And we're not the ones that anybody should be worrying about. It's just the categories are weird to me, because I think, as Sebastian said, there's nothing wrong with building steel plants and other industrial stuff, whether it's in an urban area or a rural area, it doesn't matter. I mean, you're trying to create jobs, you're trying to create a higher standard of living for the neighborhoods, and maybe the categories ought to be different. I don't know. That's above my pay grade, but maybe an industrial is a category, and it's not urban, and it's not rural, and it's not infrastructure. But pick out, maybe it's housing that is a category that gets priority. I don't know. There's some randomness in where we are today, and I don't think we know how that's going to turn out. So.
Yep. Always room for improvement.
Right.
In most instances, some of us, little room. Okay, so we have a good question here, and it is from Suzanne Lizicki. So we've got to open the floor for Suzanne. The question is, to what extent is it your job to determine the existence or timing of a visa incentive for your offering? To what extent is it your job to determine the existence or timing of a visa incentive for your offering? I feel like there's an intriguing question there that I don't quite understand. Do you guys feel like you have a handle on this? So I might be able to open the floor.
If she means the following, in other words, if I'm out there pimping out marketing selling points, if you will, and one of those selling points is that, hey, with me, you will definitely get your green card in X months, etc. I should not be doing that, right? Because we don't have the insight in that way, and we certainly defer to the immigration counsel, like Carolyn, when those questions arise, because while we can explain the general parameters of the law and what we think the USCIS should be doing, we neither know exactly how as I think Girish was saying earlier, we don't know exactly how it's working inside in terms of how they're prioritizing and how they're picking their batches and so forth. And we also don't know exactly how many other applications are out there and pending, et cetera, right? So I think we are very careful. And so I guess the short answer to your question, we do not see it as our job, but we do see it as our job not to overpromise and start making any conjectures that we really don't know the answer to.
So Suzanne did clarify the question. She, if I understand you correctly, the question was, do you feel like you have a responsibility to kind of sketch out some estimates in terms of visa processing and try to figure out the landscape and to put
same answer. I think the answer in our case is all we can do is provide some anecdotal evidence and say, hey, look, this is what we've been seeing recently, good or bad. But we don't feel comfortable making any sort of grand statements about what the USCIS is up to and what it will look like 6 or 9 or 12 months from now.
No, Girish, go please.
Yeah, look, say you're always being asked to, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's the struggle. So I think in the world of an offering, if you have a rural project and then saying that you're a rural and project, and these are what are the known benefits of rural, and I think you have to limit it. You have to limit the statement to what is known. What is out in front of you is usually things that we've already identified in your risk disclosures, and so you may highlight 1 or 2 of what those common ones that might be more practically thinking about today. But they're really not known to us. And I think that's where we actually do send them to people like you, Carolyn. I think that's the area to say, what have you seen? Because you're seeing far more level of cases than across an industry and tracking to those things from from how responses are even coming from the USCIS on those applications. And so I think there are people better served at certain points. But from sketching, all you can do is do exactly what Sebastian said. You're expected to kind of give them some expectations, and to the limit of this is what I see now. These are some of the issues that we don't know what priority processing means. And that's kind of a rule of thumb for us. And it is undefined until it's defined. I can't tell you it is, except for those words exist. And maybe your immigration lawyer can tell you otherwise.
It is frustratingly qualified. It is frustrating, like there are asterisks all over the place. So it's very, very, very difficult. And I think that the only consolation I think for us as responsible professionals in this space is that if you're going like this, and if you're going, oh my gosh, I wish I can give you a straight answer, we're probably doing our job responsibly. And to the point of, sending folks, to resources, I also refer folks to your wonderful Excel spreadsheet, Suzanne. So thank you for the work that you do there and crunching the numbers. Folks, wow, thank you. You guys actually met my expectations and they were really high. So what about that? Thank you.
Run a good circus.
Thank you so much.
Good master.
Well, we'll have to do it late night one time and just see.
Yeah,
what it would
right?
be.
I think so. I think this is the crowd. So thank you guys. Ben, Sebastian, Girish, thank you so much. And
Thank
we'll
you.
talk
Nice
soon.
to talk to all of you. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Same.
Thanks.
Bye,
Carol.
all.
friends.
Thank you, everyone.
More next time.
Our pleasure.
Bye now.